Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. This morning we'll continue where we left off yesterday in the broadcast of our reading and discussion of the book, The History of Romanism by John Dowling. We were talking about this great controversy, the great contest between the King of England and the Pope. And the man wielding the sword of the Pope was the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket. And this all had to do with the king's attempt to bring to trial for civil crimes of the Roman Catholic priests, one of which was a murderer, a rapist and a murderer. Thomas Becket was the Archbishop of Canterbury and took the position that he would protect this murderous priest because the priest belonged to the Pope and should submit to his justice and not the king's. All right, eventually this controversy escalated to a division on the one side of the current reigning Pope at the time and Thomas Becket versus the king and all of his court, and even the rest of the ecclesiastics in Britain, the church. They wanted Thomas Becket out, and they wanted to bring this murderous priest to trial. But Becket was issued a bull, a papal bull, relieving him of any obligation that, or any oath that he had swore to making himself subservient to the king, which made him the sole vassal of the Pope and under the Pope's control, and the king had no authority over him. All right, the story as it evolved, and I've done a little research on my own. Apparently, in company with some members of his court, King Henry II let drop from his lips words to the effect, "Who will relieve me of this pestilent priest?" Speaking of Becket. And some of his knights took that as a signal to assassinate Thomas Becket. And they did so at Canterbury Cathedral, the seat of his episcopal authority, right in his own church. They came in with swords and they killed him right in his own church. And as a result, the Roman Catholic Church deified Thomas Becket as a saint, and also that his relics and his bones they perform miracles. Okay? That God had punctuated Thomas Becket by elevating him to godlike status, that his remains have the power to conduct miracles. Okay? This is typical of Roman Catholic saints and martyrs. They're elevated to the status of saints, and then all sorts of ridiculous rumors are bantered about that their remains are miraculous. Okay, that you can actually pray to those dead bones and have miracles performed for your benefit. And so people go on pilgrimages, even to this day, to the site of Canterbury Cathedral and pray to the dead remains of Thomas Becket, beseeching him for miracles. Okay? This is another one of the doctrine of demons. Okay? This is idolatry. This is saint worship. And it is one of the distinguishable marks of the Church of Antichrist, the synagogue of Satan. Okay? They don't pray to Jesus, they pray to saints and Mary and all these ridiculous things that are specifically forbidden in the Scriptures. It's called necromancy, prayers to the dead. All right, the Bible specifically forbids this, which becomes one of the most powerful aspects of the Roman Catholic Church. As long as the world believes that dead souls can perform miracles, Roman Catholicism has sway over those people. All right, now continuing, we're reading from subsection 40 on page 279, if you're following along in the book. It says, the tragical result of this controversy between the king, the court, the ecclesiastics of Great Britain, and Thomas Becket and the Pope on the other side, it says the tragical result of this controversy is well known. Okay, it's one of the most memorable aspects in British history. Okay, if you ever study British history, you are taught about the assassination of Thomas Becket, the martyrdom of Thomas Becket. Okay, we remember the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. England remembers the assassination of Thomas Becket, the vassal of the Pope. All right, the tragical result of this controversy is well known. The haughty but courageous primate, Thomas Becket, was assassinated December 29th, 1171 A.D. by 4 gentlemen, that is, knights, of King Henry's court, in consequence of a passionate exclamation they had heard drop from the lips of their royal master, that's Henry II, and was soon after his death canonized. Thomas Becket was soon after his death canonized, in other words, elevated to sainthood by the papacy. He was canonized as a saint of the very highest rank. Okay? He's right up there with Mary in the Roman Catholic Church. Now it says, endless were the panegyrics pronounced on his virtues. Okay? Panegyrics is a word that's kind of fallen out of use. For many of my listeners, you've never heard the term before, but it has to do with eulogies or praises. Okay? When someone dies, we have a eulogy, they call it, where people get up and talk about the glorious past of the deceased. Well, that's what panegyrics are, praises of the dead. It says, endless were the praises pronounced on Thomas Becket's virtues and the miracles wrought by his relics, according to popish historians. Okay, this is the miraculous ability of his dead bones to perform miracles. He says, and the miracles wrought by his relics, according to the popish historians, were more numerous, more nonsensical, and more impudently attested to than those which ever filled the legend of any saint or martyr. Okay? So from this you should take that the Roman Catholic Church has elevated Thomas Becket to the status of a god in the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church is a church of many, many, many gods, innumerable gods, all of which can bestow grace, all of which can intercede between man and heaven, all of which are remembered every year on the Roman Catholic liturgical calendar, just like we remember Jesus every time we take the communion table. Okay? This is why it's the synagogue of Satan. Now, Thomas Becket's shrine not only restored dead men to life, it is said, it also restored the life of cows, dogs, and horses. That's right. If you got a sick pet, you can pray to the dead bones of Thomas Becket in Canterbury Cathedral, and your cows, your dogs, and your horses will be healed. Somebody show me where that is a possibility in the Bible. Okay? It says, presents were sent and pilgrimages performed from all parts of Christendom. Not just England, but all parts of Christendom. People trudged their way to Canterbury Cathedral in England to pray at the tomb of Thomas Becket. Okay? And they did this in order to obtain his intercession with heaven. Okay? Thomas Becket's bones intercede in heaven, according to Roman Catholic teaching. And it was computed that in 1 year, about 100,000 pilgrims arrived at Canterbury and paid their devotion to his tomb. Okay? So now you understand, if you've never known before, what the Roman Catholic Church is. Now it says, the following quaint verse in relation to the throngs of pilgrims that came to pay their devotions at the shrine of Thomas Becket in Canterbury Cathedral is from Chaucer, one of the most ancient of our English poets, who was born about a century and a half after the death and canonization of Thomas Becket. Here's his poem. And I'm not much of a poet, so you'll have to excuse me. Excuse me. Here's the poem. And especially from every shire's end of England to Canterbury they wend, the holy blissful martyr for to seek, that them hath holpen when that they were sick. Okay? A little poem, no doubt rehearsed by Roman Catholics all over the world, how the dead bones of Thomas Becket can heal the sick. All right, so that's what happens when you kill a Roman Catholic martyr. Jesus plainly said the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but spiritual. Okay, the warfare is spiritual, not carnal. King Henry II was not a Christian. King Henry II was a Catholic who was just angry that the Pope interfered with his temporal power. But according to Roman Catholic canon law, the Pope is King of Kings, and every king must be his vassal, or they shall not be king. The Pope crowns the kings. The Pope manages the kings so long as they wear his crown, and if at any time the Pope wishes, he can remove that crown and give it to another. King Henry II of England defied the temporal power of the Pope, but he was still a vassal of the papacy. Never once did King Henry II renounce the papacy as the Antichrist. All right, and so he suffered the pains of being a papist in a king's throne. All right, now chapter 5. And by the way, before we even continue with chapter 5, I would like to ask the question and lament a little bit that King Henry II, or rather the author of this book, makes no mention of any effort that King Henry II made after the assassination of Thomas Becket to bring that murderous priest to trial. Remember, that's what started all of this. Okay? Had he been a true man of God, would he not have brought that murderous priest to trial and stripped him of his pontifical robes and called him a vassal of the Antichrist and sent him off to Rome to worship his little god and not bring his little god with him back to England? That's what a true Christian would do. Renounce the Pope as Antichrist and the murderous priest under his protection as a vassal of the Antichrist, and export both of them out of the country. But King Henry II wasn't a Christian, by my estimation. Now we'll continue with chapter 5. It's entitled Popery in England Continued, Pope Innocent and King John. This also is one of the most memorable histories of England. If you want to understand the history of the United States, it behooves you, it's absolutely necessary to comprehend the history of Great Britain, the history of England, and that's why this reading is so important for us. This is subsection 41 on page 279 if you're following along. The most remarkable exhibition of priestly tyranny and successful papal arrogance that has ever occurred in Great Britain, and perhaps in the world, was that which signalized the pontificate of Pope Innocent III, a pope that carried out the policies of Hildebrand, that is, Pope Gregory VII, to an unprecedented extent in his treatment of the Kingdom of England, and its weak and contemptible king, John, in the early part of the 13th century. It is justly remarked by the historians of the Middle Ages that, quote, the pontificate of Innocent III may be regarded as the meridian or the noonday of papal usurpation, unquote. In other words, the height of papal power. Excuse me. Now it says, in each of the three leading objects which Rome had pursued, namely, independent sovereignty, supremacy over the Christian churches, and control over the princes of the earth, it was the fortune of this pontiff to conquer. The maxims of Gregory VII were now matured by more than 100 years, and the right of trampling upon the necks of kings had been received, at least among the churchmen, as an inherent attribute of the papacy. Okay? So what this means is, it's widely accepted now. After 100 years after Gregory VII, it is widely accepted now in so-called Christendom that the Pope has the power to rule over the kings of the earth. Prophecy fulfilled. It's not only just a blind usurpation of the papacy, I have the power to rule over the kings of the earth. No, it's accepted now that the papacy has power over kings. Quote, as the sun and the moon are placed in the firmament, says the pontiff, the greater as the light of the day and the lesser of the night, thus are there two powers in the church, the pontifical, that is the Pope, which as having the charge of souls is the greater light, and the royal, which is the less, and to which the bodies of men only are entrusted, unquote. So if you didn't follow along, the Pope makes a public assertion. Just as the sun is the light that rules the day, so is the Pope. Okay? And the moon, which reigns at night and is the lesser light, so is the king. In other words, the sun is the Pope, the moon is the king. And obviously, the assessment is that the sun is the greater light over the moon. And the moon must reflect the light of the sun, right? It's as if the Pope says, look at the example that God placed in the heavens. The sun rules supreme. The moon simply reflects the light of the sun. So the lesson is that the Pope rules over the kings of the earth just like the sun rules in the heavens. And the king, the lesser light, does not have light of its own, but can only reflect the light from the sun. So the moon, that is the king, must be the servant of the sun, the papacy. Now I'll read the quote again, and you can see for yourself if I've done violence. He says, quote, as the sun and the moon are placed in the firmament, says the Pope, the greater as the light of day and the lesser of the night, thus are there two powers in the church, the pontifical, which as having the charge of souls is the greater, that is the sun, and the royal, that is the king, the civil power, which is the less, and to which the bodies of men are entrusted. So, the Pope has power over souls, the king has power over flesh. Now, if the sun rules the moon, and the moon reflects the light of the sun, so too the king must reflect the light of the sun. Now, since the jurisdiction of the king is the bodies of men, The sun must rule the moon, and the moon must do what the sun says over the bodies of men. So, here's the conclusion of the whole matter. The sun is solely responsible for the souls of men. Kind of reminds you of Revelation chapter 18, verse 4 and 5, doesn't it? The papacy has control over the souls of men, and the king, who is the vassal of the sun, has power over the physical bodies of men. In other words, the Pope has control of both body and soul. Okay, global monarch. Do you follow the logic? This has been repeated over and over and over by the papacy, reiterated after reiteration after reiteration, that the Pope is all in all, God on earth, supreme authority. The Pope is the judge of every man, and no man may judge him. So, in every way possible, the papacy, from its earliest days, has usurped the role of Christ on the earth. That makes him Antichrist, doesn't it? Can you name me one other institution in the whole history of mankind where anyone has more perfectly fulfilled the role of Antichrist than the papacy? I dare you to come to another conclusion. It's simply impossible. The papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist. He fulfills all the prophecies regarding the Antichrist. No one else even comes close. When asked the question, who is the Antichrist in the world, there's but one answer: the papacy. There's not even a challenger for the role. Now, how is it that all of Christendom in our day is inexplicably ignorant about who the Antichrist is? And who is it in your life who has the most responsibility to make sure that you know who the Antichrist is so that you will not be deceived? Your pastors. No one else has that qualification. Your pastors. He's called a pastor because he is to lead the sheep. But if he does not know who the lion is, who kills the sheep, and does not warn the sheep about the lion, he is no pastor. He is no shepherd. That's my charge against your pastor. Whoever your pastor is, in whatever church you go to, he is not a pastor if he cannot warn the sheep about the lion who preys upon the flock. He is not qualified to carry a staff, to feed the sheep, to guard the sheep, to lead the sheep, nor to teach the sheep. He is not qualified. He has failed the basic qualifications for being a shepherd. He doesn't even know who preys upon the sheep. And he should be removed from his position. And a man of righteousness, wisdom, and scriptural and historical knowledge should be put in his place. A true shepherd who carries the sword of the Spirit against the wolves and the lions preying among the flock. We've summarily just fired everyone who calls himself a pastor in this country. There's not but a handful of pastors and shepherds all across this country who, if they know who the Antichrist is, renounces him and identifies him as the Antichrist and warns the sheep. That's the basic requirement for being a pastor in a church today. He must know who the Antichrist is. He must positively identify him as such, renounce him as the Antichrist, and protect the sheep from his usurpations of Christ's rightful throne in the church. There's no one that does that in this country. They are all summarily fired. They're not qualified for the job. Now, what about our politicians? What about the king? Who has the basic qualification for leading a country and ruling under Christ? Must not he too also know who the Antichrist is and renounce him as such and protect his people from his usurpations? I apply the same basic qualification to a politician. Otherwise, they're not qualified for the job. Now, let me ask you a question. What do you have when, in a day, in a word, all the pastors and all the politicians of this country are summarily fired for not having the basic qualifications to lead? We have Christ's kingdom. Christ is back on his rightful throne. King of kings and Lord of lords. Do you realize it could happen in a day? If God's people would wake out of their futurist slumber and take their faith seriously and demand that both the pastors and the politicians of this world acknowledge the papacy for what it is, what it has been, what it always will be, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the Antichrist of Scripture, history, and prophecy, and we will no longer be subject to anyone who carries his power. We belong to Christ. And you either serve Christ or you do not serve. That's what Christianity is. And Jesus said, when I return, shall I find faith on the earth? My answer is no. I think we ought to change that. So the Pope, over and over and over, in all of his bulls, in all of his papal encyclicals, in every official word that comes from the papacy, it's always that the Pope is the sun, the king or the politicians are the moon, and they must reflect the light of the sun. They must do the sun's bidding. And since they do not recognize, neither the pastors nor the politicians, that the Pope is the very man of sin of Scripture, history, and prophecy, they believe him. And they all work together, pastors and politicians, to make us subjects of the man of sin. And with this intoxicating assertion that the Pope is the sun, the governments and the kingdoms of the world are his vassals, and that they together must rule over the souls and the bodies of men all over the world, every man, woman, and child, the author says, intoxicated with these conceptions, the result of successful ambition, he thought no quarrel of princes or kings beyond the sphere of his jurisdiction. Okay? With this assertion, the Pope asserts himself over all jurisdictions, religious and temporal. And it says, on every side the thunders of Rome broke over the heads of princes. Okay, we're talking about the beginning of the 13th century, the late 1100s and 1200s. The midnight of the world was the noonday of the papacy. The papacy interjected itself in every sphere of the kingdoms of this world. King of kings and Lord of lords, that's what he was. He was accepted as such. Let me ask you a question. We can all read the Scriptures and just shake our heads in shame and disgust. Every time Israel fell into idolatry, every time they failed to obey God's law and His commands, every time they fell into apostasy, every time they betrayed their Creator and their Savior, even to the point of crucifying Him. What's our excuse? Are we any better than the Jews, we Gentiles? Or have we not failed to a greater extent than even the Jews? To allow ourselves to become subjects of the Holy Roman Pontiff, to allow our politicians to invite the Holy Roman Pontiff to come to speak to a joint session of Congress, to parade him around the country like a rock star, to let him splatter his holy water over the scene of 9/11. No one dares to call him Antichrist. Has he any less power here in the 21st century that he had in the 12th? We ought to all hang our heads in shame. Let me tell you, if you're not willing to hang your head in shame, I tell you, I am. I wish I had a better voice. I wish I had a better venue. I wish I could speak to every American. I wish John Dowling had a voice in this country. He says, intoxicated with these conceptions, the result of successful ambition, he, the Pope, thought no quarrel of princes were beyond his sphere of jurisdiction. On every side, the thunders of Rome, the thunders of the Pope broke over the heads of princes and kings. At the Pope's pleasure, he would place a kingdom under interdict, and instantly public worship is suspended, and the dead lie unburied. Now, we've talked about interdiction before. The Pope has the power to close all the churches. Can't have your babies baptized. You can't get married. You can't even have a funeral if you die. Okay? Your assets are locked up. That's the power the Pope wielded over the kings of the earth. If the kings of the earth didn't obey him, all he did was order all of his priests to close the churches. And since everybody thinks the power of heaven is vested in the churches, why, they were simply left without a Savior. Okay? What does the Bible say? God no longer dwells in temples made with hands. Do you know what effect an interdict would have if the Pope had the power to impose an interdict on me in this country? Not one thing. Not one thing. The Pope is not my king, nor is he my Lord. I have a king and I have a Lord. He lives forever, and he knows my very thoughts. And while I was yet a sinner, he died for me. What need do I have for a man, or any group of men, or a whole nation of men, or a whole world of men? But on every side the thunders of Rome broke over the heads of princes. At his pleasure he would place a kingdom under interdict, and instantly public worship is suspended and the dead lie unburied. If the clergy complained to the Pope that the people, cut off from the offices of religion, refuse to pay their tithes, and they begin to go hear the sectaries, the Pope consents that divine service shall be performed with closed doors, but denies them the rights of sepulture. So the Pope makes a concession. We're going to let Mass be said in the churches, but the doors are going to be closed. Nobody's going to come to hear it. That's the power of the Pope. And the dead still remain unburied. Now, subsection 42. Pope Innocent commenced his course of lordly arrogance toward England almost as soon as he ascended the papal throne, and during the reign of Richard Coeur de Lion, the predecessor of John. In order to counteract the influences of the monks of Canterbury, remember it was the monks of Canterbury whose seat of power was the cathedral at Canterbury Cathedral, where the archbishop resided. It was these monks who had the responsibility, who had the privilege and the power to elect all ecclesiastics in England. Okay, these monks were the vassals of the Pope. And they made sure that anyone who ascended to a high office in the Roman Catholic Church, whether it be a bishop, an archbishop, or whatever dignitary, they too were the Pope's vassals. They answered to the Pope and the Pope only, just like Thomas Becket. Now, if the king wishes no longer to be a vassal of either the monks or their electors or the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Pope, the king wishes to elect all the ecclesiastics. In other words, put the monks of Canterbury and Canterbury itself out of business. Unless the Pope is a complete and total vassal of the Pope, he doesn't want the monks appointing the powerful ecclesiastics of the church. He himself wishes to appoint the ecclesiastics of the church so that they will be his vassals. Okay? Every ecclesiastic appointed by the monks of the Roman Catholic Church at the cathedral at Canterbury are potential enemies of the king. These ecclesiastics appointed by the monks at the cathedral at Canterbury are the shadow government. They are the ones who watch over the king to make sure he stays in line and does what the Pope says to do. So the king, naturally, if he's not a vassal of the Pope, wishes to elect the ecclesiastics himself. Okay? Make sense? He wants the church leaders to be respectful of his power, even if it differs from the Pope. Let me ask you something. Who elects the ecclesiastics of the United States of America in the Roman Catholic Church? Is it the President of the United States? Is it Congress? Is it the people of the United States? No, it's the Pope. The Pope. And what do you suppose the role of the ecclesiastics of the Roman Catholic Church are in this country? Just like England before us, they are the vassals of the Pope, and they are also the shadow government that oversees the king and his court. Same stuff, different millennium. Nothing has changed. There's nothing new under the sun. How long is it going to take us to catch on? How long is it going to take us before we do something? Before we protest? Do you understand? That's where we get the name Protestants. Because we protested the power of the Pope, asserting that he has no power from heaven, that he has it only from Satan, that the papacy is the Antichrist, the servant of Satan in the world, not Christ. So, the King of England wishes to set the cathedral at Canterbury and its archbishop and its monks aside and take on the business himself of electing the ecclesiastics in England. Now it says, in order to counteract the influence of the monks of Canterbury in their election of the primates, and to place future elections more under the royal influence, that is, the influence of the king, King Richard authorized the erection of an episcopal palace at Lambeth. Okay? Sort of a new Canterbury Cathedral, only it's the king's cathedral and not the pope's. You see what he's doing? He wishes to build a new church at Lambeth. It's going to be the king's church. And that's where the election of primates is going to take place. The Pope's church, Canterbury Cathedral, is going to be retired. So is all the monks. And the newly elected ecclesiastics or primates of the church will be appointed by the Pope, by the king, and no longer the Pope. It says the purpose was to replace future elections more under the royal influence. King Richard authorized the erection of an episcopal palace at Lambeth, intending to remove the place of election in the future from Canterbury to that place, Lambeth. The suspicious monks, jealous of their exclusive right, which they had claimed of electing the Archbishop of Canterbury, secretly dispatched a messenger to Pope Innocent at Rome, from whom they obtained a papal bull addressed to the Archbishop at the time, Hubert, who was himself in favor of the new change, commanding Hubert within 30 days to demolish the works at Lambeth, and threatened Hubert with suspension from his office in case of disobedience. For, says the insolent Pope, quote, "It is not fit that any man should have any authority who does not revere and obey the apostolic see." Unquote. Let me read it again in case you missed it. The Pope says, quote, "It is not fit that any man should have any authority who does not revere and obey the apostolic see." That is the papacy. Unquote. Now, what do you want me to say? Listen carefully. It is not fit that any man should have any authority who does not revere and obey Christ. It is not fit that any man, whether he be a priest, a pastor, or a politician, should not have any authority who does not revere and obey Christ. Your pastor has no authority unless he obeys Christ. Your politician, your president, your Supreme Court, your Congress has no authority unless they obey Christ. That's the way it is in the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Does that mean the kingdom of heaven isn't for 2,000 years? No, Jesus meant what he said. He didn't mince any words. He said it flat out. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. What was he saying? You have a king, and you have a kingdom. Just reach out and touch me. So where's that kingdom been for 2,000 years? We didn't take it. We rejected it. And we made ourselves vassals to men and the man of sin. You don't still think you have any reason to hang your head in shame? I do. I hang my head in shame. God help me. It says the king was enraged at the conduct of the monks in applying to Rome without his permission, and the archbishop dispatched his agents to Rome, who were admitted to an audience of the Pope on one day, and the monks of Canterbury were permitted to reply on the next day. The result of these proceedings was that the Pope confirmed his former sentence against the Archbishop, which he intimated to him by a bull dated November 20th, threatening him with the highest censure of the Church if he did not immediately demolish the works at Lambeth. You know, the Pope has just ordered this Archbishop to get a crew together to raze that church to the ground, to its very foundation. The church that the king sought to build. That's the power of Pope Innocent, to demolish that church. And it says His Holiness the Pope at the same time directed another bull to the king, commanding him in the magisterial tone to see the sentence of the Apostolic See executed, and telling him further that if he presumed to oppose its execution, he would soon convince him by the severity of his punishment how hard it is to kick against the pricks. Okay? I've ordered my archbishop and my monks to destroy that church. The king is not going to elect ecclesiastics. They are the sole subject of the Pope. I will elect the ecclesiastics of that country, and they will be my shadow government in the country to make sure that you remain my vassal and that you do what I tell you to do, because I am the King of kings and the Lord of lords. I am the sun. You are the moon. You are to reflect my light, or you have no light at all. And if you don't obey me, if you somehow prevent my monks and my priests and my archbishop from leveling that church to the ground, I'm going to show you just what it's like to kick against the pricks. That's the power of the Pope. You think he talks that way to President Trump? You better believe he does. President Trump is a vassal of the Pope, and no righteousness will ever prevail in this country because of it. And Trump's not alone. Every president is a vassal of the Pope, and that's why you are poor and your rights have been taken away, and you have so much uncertainty in your life.